Again, a very big welcome to you all. This session is titled Your Tax Law Career, Perspectives on Different Pathways in the Tax Profession. My name is Brandon King. I am the chair of the Young Lawyers Forum of the ABA Tax Section. I am very thrilled to be putting on this session today. We're all excited. We've got a very distinguished group of panelists who are very eager to share their paths and how they started, how they've gotten to where they are in the tax law profession today. Just a few housekeeping reminders before we get started. If you're not speaking, please do keep yourself on mute so we can try to eliminate background noise. Feel free to come off camera. We want this to be an interactive session where you can feel free to chime in, ask questions, jump in. The panelists are very eager to discuss. And finally, this session is being recorded, as you probably heard from the nice notifications there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to briefly Adam Abrahams and Sabrina Strand, chair and co-chair of the Closely Held Business Committee that's co-sponsoring this event. Over to you both.
Thank you, Brandon. And again, I'm Adam Abrahams, and I am the chair of the Closely Held Businesses Committee. Thank you to all who are attending today. A good afternoon to some of you, and perhaps good morning to some of you as well. I don't want to get too much into our committee at the moment, but please feel free to contact either myself or Sabrina or Brandon just to learn more about the committees in ABA Tax. ABA Tax does a lot of good work. Sabrina?
Hey everyone, my name is Sabrina Strand. I am the co-chair for the Closely Held Business Committee, and I wanted to welcome all of you to the panel. The panelists are excellent, and I just want to reinforce what Adam says. Please reach out to any of the panelists, or myself or Brandon King. We are here, and we hope that you guys join the ABA and maybe potentially one of our committees. So with that, I will turn it over to Bryce to introduce the panel.
Thank you all. So I'm Bryce Parkland. I've been asked to moderate the panel today. So let me just briefly introduce everybody. I don't want to give too much away because they're going to be talking about their experiences and their career as well. So I'll keep it brief. So today we have Rene Morenci. He is a tax practitioner out of Missouri with Sandberg Phoenix. He focuses on general corporate work, M&A, estate planning, and tax planning. He counsels with a lot of businesses throughout the phases of the business life cycle. He's been very active in the ABA and a lot of local bar associations. He's been the fellow for the ABA Real Property Trust and Estate Law section, as well as a delegate for the ABA's House of Delegates. Rene has a JD and an LLM in taxation from Washington University School of Law. Next, we have Sabrina Conyers. She is coming out of, or she is with us out of North Carolina, and she's with McGuire Woods right now. She does partnership and corporate tax, and provides a lot of domestic and international tax planning, general corporate governance, private equity, and real estate finance planning and strategy. And Sabrina has a JD from Columbia, and she received her LLM from New York University. Next, we have Robert Turnips. He's joining us from Alabama. He's with Albrecht Jackson. Robert's focus is on tax planning, trust and estates, tax controversies, business transactions, succession planning, and probate. He does a lot with his practice. He also is active in the ABA. As you heard, he's the chair of the Closely Held Business Committee, or sorry, he's the past chair of the Closely Held Business Committee. And then he's been a council director for the ABA tax section. He received his JD from Cumberland School of Law at Samford University and an LLM from the University of Alabama School of Law. And then finally on our panel today, we have Adam Abrahams. He's with Myers, Hurwitz, and Abrahams out of Maryland. He's focused on tax planning, tax litigation, estate planning, and probate. He received his JD from Cleveland Marshall College of Law and an LLM from Georgetown University Law Center. And as you were already introduced, he's the chair of the closely held business committee for the ABA's tax section. And that is our panel today. I'd like to first invite our panel to give more of an introduction about what they do in the day-to-day life, how they got into tax, and then just kind of a general overview about your tax career today. Let's start with Rene.
Right now? Yes, okay. All right. Great. Yes, so I got into tax law sort of in a circuitous way. In fact, I fell into it quite like a person might fall into one of those sewer hole covers in the street, except instead of a sewer, it was a wonderful experience that I fell into, that really captured and stimulated my mind. And so initially I was actually attending law school and MBA school, and I took one class. It was a tax credits class actually, and that was my gateway drug. And I took that went well, and I proceeded to take a lot of other classes. And eventually the person who administered the LLM program told me that, I should probably consider getting an LLM. And I thought, no, not for me. And then I took more and more tax classes. And then at the end, she finally said, look, I think it's time. And I said, okay, you're probably right. And so that was how that ended up. But yeah, my practice, like I mentioned, is driven by corporate and estate planning and working with closely held businesses, and that's where most of my work comes from. I don't do any controversy work, but I'm transactional all day, every day. So that's the short story. There's a long story, but I'm sure nobody wants to hear the long story.
Thank you. And Sabrina, what about you? How did you get into tax, and how do you get to where you are today in your career?
Sure. So first, thank you all for having me on this panel. I'm excited to just share a little bit about my journey. So I actually became interested in tax in law school. I started in law school thinking I was going to kind of become a civil rights attorney, and then potentially a corporate entertainment attorney, right? Like two very different ends of the spectrum. But I took a federal income tax class, and that really was super interesting. And then when I was able to land a 1L position at a law firm in New York that had a tax department, and so I got a few assignments through that tax department, and I just thought it was great. I proceeded in law school to take a few more tax classes, taxation of financial instruments. That was not a draw, but then I also took like taxation of property transactions, and I just really did enjoy a number of aspects of tax. And I wanted a career where I thought that I would have kind of a hybrid practice. So something where I could do both corporate work and potentially litigation, especially if I was going to do controversy work, potentially with the IRS. And so tax really fit very neatly into that. And then once I rotated through the tax departments in each of my summer programs, I think that solidified the decision. I did not have a business or accounting background. And so once I started as a first year, I started directly in the tax department, at my first a large law firm. But, I had a lot of ground to cover because I really did not have, I really didn't have the background. And so that's how I ended up going to get my LLM and doing that part-time while I was working in New York. So that was kind of the beginning. I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more of the detail, but throughout my career, I spent about 11 and a half years working in law firms in New York City. And then my family decided to relocate to Charlotte, and I joined Ernst & Young. So I spent 5 years working as a senior manager in tax, focused on real estate and partnership tax work at EY. and then was able to come out of that and leverage that into a partnership back at first Nelson Mullins and now McGuire Woods. And so that's just a little bit about my journey. As far as what I do now, as Bryce explained, I focus a lot on corporate and partnership M&A transactions. So, you know, any kind of across all industries and in all sectors, really help my clients, which are, you know, buying and selling different companies. Again, whether they're entities, taxes, partnerships, or as flow-throughs, excuse me, or corporations. And then I also do a lot of work on the private equity side in fund formation and deal execution. And so that's where like more of my international experience comes in doing more inbound tax planning for foreign investors that are investing in the United States.
Thank you. Robert, how about you? How did you get started and what do you do today?
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? I guess, all right, I see some nodding heads. Good deal. All right. Again, I'm Robert Turnips. I work with Armbrick Jackson, and I'm the old guy on the panel, and also I'd call us the small town guy. I work in Mobile, Alabama, and have worked here my entire career. But when I went to law school, I went to Cumberland School of Law in Birmingham, Alabama, and fully expected a litigation career. That was really where I was heading. I had good writing skills, so I was looking to be more of an appellate lawyer. And that's exactly what I did. When I got out of Cumberland, I went and clerked for an Alabama Supreme Court justice for a year, and then moved right into a litigation practice. It was a little strange though, because the classes that I actually enjoyed back at Cumberland were not necessarily litigation classes. I'm the nerd that enjoyed secured transactions. I absolutely loved it. And I loved how you had to put the pieces of the puzzle together to figure out how things worked. I loved my tax class. My very favorite class was Decedents, Estates, and Trusts, which is bizarre because most other people were asleep and I was actually just hanging on every word. So I remember that. And then got into the practice and clerked for a year with a judge, and then came to Mobile, dragged my Birmingham, Alabama wife kicking and screaming to Mobile, and worked for a Mobile law firm in litigation. And I actually worked as a litigator for 6 years, and I tried jury cases. I did plenty of appeals during that time frame, probably 25, 30 appeals, because that's really what was my focus. But also active trial law, was beginning to handle my own cases, kind of developing as an associate. Realized after 6 years, I really was not enjoying the litigation practice, but, obviously kept going, and went and talked to my boss about other opportunities. We had, for the small firm at that time, a small transactional practice, mainly real estate and that kind of work. And he had a need of a lawyer. So I got into a transactional practice. This is probably, I'd say 2003, probably about 2003. So I started to transition a little bit, all the while continuing litigation. And then after I'd done that a while and done pretty well, the firm came to me and said, "We really do need a tax lawyer. Would you be interested in going back to school?" And of course, at this time I had 3 children, all under the age of 6, and thought about it and said, well, if we can find a way to do it, I can do it. And luckily, the University of Alabama had a program that allowed me to actually continue to work and go to school at the same time. So I worked, at that time, 60 hours a week, and then went to school and studied about 10 to 15 hours a week as well. And I did that for a couple of years and got my LLM from Alabama. Since that time, I have been a tax lawyer. But being in a small town, you have to understand, and I think hopefully we've got some other small town lawyers on the call. It's very difficult to just do tax law in a smaller town. Mobile's not a small town. I mean, it's 500,000 people. We've got quite a few people in the county, but it still has a small town feel. We're certainly not New York. We're not Washington, D.C. You cannot specialize in one particular aspect of tax law and do nothing but 1031 exchanges or 409A non-qualified deferred comp agreements. You can't just do that. You take what comes in the door. And so when you look at my practice over the past 20 years, It's a very diverse practice. I mean, I've handled any number of things. And of course, I think we'll talk about, the differences in practices later. So I'll leave that for later. But, I've been blessed over 20 years of being able to develop that practice and having good mentors that have helped me along the way. And that's it.
Sorry, thank you. And last but not least, Adam, how about you? How'd you get started in tax and how'd you get to where you are today?
Thank you, Bryce. First of all, Robbie, I think I have you beat on the age thing, but anyway, tax is a second legal career for me. The first 10 years of my legal career, I spent practicing commercial litigation, title insurance, commercial law, some probate, and I only took one tax class in law school. I was geared towards practicing in real estate, and I was trying to find a position in that area of law. And what happened was I came to DC in 2003. This is my 7th year of practice, by the way. And I worked for someone who practiced real estate. I absolutely hated it. I was miserable and I didn't know what to do. And I had a conversation with my mom about this. And she said, well, you like the tax class when you were in law school. Why don't you give it a try? So my mom knew someone who was a tax professor, and she got him to agree to speak with me. I had a conversation with him and he said, well, you can't just waltz into any firm, any company and ask to practice tax law. It's not going to happen. Not in today's climate. This is back in 2003, mind you. So he said, you should look to get the tax LLM. And so what happened was at this firm that I was miserable at, I somehow was able to last 2 years, got into Georgetown. And at the same time, I got a position at First American Corp, practicing commercial real estate. It's really more on the title insurance side, but I was handling real estate transactions. And I was able to go to school part-time over a period of 3 years. Now, mind you, I had been married when I started Georgetown, I'd been married for less than 3 years. And my oldest daughter was born June 27th, and I started at Georgetown at the end of August of 2006. You can imagine. And then my second daughter was born in March of 2008, March 25th, a few weeks before my final exams for the second year. So I think like Robbie, I was working while I was trying to get my LLM, and it took me a while to, get where I am. But I think looking back, having these experiences sort of helped me in determining that tax law was the right area for me. You might hear some actors say, well, if I didn't do these movies, I wouldn't have been where I am today. And I sort of feel like that as well. As far as my practice, it's really a hybrid practice. It's more planning, however, than controversy. I mean, we go to tax court, but we're not like one of those firms that just practices controversy exclusively or has a tax controversy department. But we do take controversy matters. The probate sort of flows from the estate planning. Clients will, maybe not the client themselves because the client passes, but of course the family members will ask us to handle the probate. And I think, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but it's a testament to those working around me and people on this panel and learning from them, is that you do well on matters. Clients will want to have you try and help on a few ancillary things, probate being one of them. So my past experiences have allowed me to do this. So you might be surprised. There's some attorneys who just can't do some things maybe I take for granted just because of my past experiences. But of course, if I were to say, or if Robbie were to talk to me about secure transactions, I say, whoa, wait a minute, that would be a foreign concept to me. So as far as the planning is concerned, We do get into some international planning, but it's more outbound transactions. For some reason, I get a lot of FBAR calls dealing with that. That seems to come up. And also Section 911 for US citizens living overseas. That seems to come up a lot here in the DC area. So when I first started the LLM, by the way, I was actually looking into M&A transactions. I love my corporate 2 class, Section 368A. I loved it, but it was tough to get a position doing that, practicing that. We're a small shop, so it's tough to get that type of client that, where you actually are going to be involved in an M&A transaction. But I guess in telling you all this, it's taken a while for me to get where I'm at, but it's been worth the journey, and it has been a journey.
Thank you so much. So I find it interesting that our 4 panelists and I have an LLM. So I think a big question out there is an LLM necessary? I'll open it up, whoever wants to talk about that.
Well, it helped me for where I came from. I mean, I understand the other side of it as far as, do you really need an LLM, especially if you're in certain areas of the country, especially I know in the Midwest where I grew up, and Robbie, I can appreciate that. Cleveland is not a small town, but it's not like DC, New York, San Fran, Miami. I know I've left out some cities, but it's not a large city or a place where you can practice law that allows you to, let's just say, practice exclusively in the area of 1031 exchanges. Or 1202 stock transactions, pick your code section. You just are not able to do that unless you work for a large firm. You are going to be, especially if you're in the tax arena, you're going to find yourself, I think, in some ways practicing business law, maybe not getting into securities, things like that, but you have to have knowledge of that particular area because you are advising businesses.
I agree with Adam. I think that this is an area, honestly, if you're going to be a tax lawyer, not in a particular transactional thing. I mean, I guess maybe you could pick a particular area. If you're a real estate lawyer and you decide you're going to do 1031 exchanges and that's all you're doing, then maybe maybe an LLM wouldn't necessarily be appropriate. Certainly you can focus on that one area and do it that, but those are few and far between. There's a lot of complexity involved in tax law, obviously. It's an enormous code. You need to, at least when you go to an LLM, you're getting information on the background of what this entails, as far as capital transactions. You understand kind of the basics of what that means and why things work the way they do. So I think it's pretty, if you're going to be a tax lawyer, you're going to be able to handle tax matters that come in front of you, then yes, I would say an LLM would be appropriate. Maybe you can specialize if you've got other tax lawyers in your firm and you want to do litigation, you want to do tax controversy work. Maybe you could learn that. Again, it's just another book of procedures you would have to learn for litigation. Maybe if you're going to do one particular area of tax, you could avoid it. But if you're going to be a tax lawyer, then certainly I would recommend an LLM.
And I think the reality is, I'm sorry, Sabrina, quick comment. I think the reality is, if you think you're going to be working somewhere where that person or department's going to teach you tax, it's pretty unlikely. There's only one situation I know of in my, I hate to say it now, 26 years of practice. Person who graduated school with me, graduated law school, he actually found a place where it was a solo practice, and the attorney he worked for asked him if he wanted to learn partnership tax. So he was able to audit classes at Case Western Reserve in the LLM program, but that is rare. It just doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, Sabrina, go ahead.
No, thanks for adding that. And so I agree with both of you. I have, in my experience, the LLM was necessary, and for a few reasons. So first, I did come into tax law without, really any kind of background in business or economics or accounting. And so I really needed that baseline. right? I needed that baseline of understanding kind of laid out a bit more for me in order for me to be successful at the firm I was at. I think additionally, when you're coming in super green, and I think it actually applies whether you're green or not, but you know, when you're coming in, at least for me, it was very, very stressful to try to even understand, excuse my language, but what the heck I was doing, right? Like I needed that 50,000 foot view. I needed to try to understand how the pieces work together in order for me to properly contribute my piece. And so I thought that the LLM program was absolutely wonderful and necessary for those reasons. Now, I didn't come to that decision on my own. I was actually at a firm where half of the partners were also professors at NYU in the program. And so I was kind of voluntold, right, to do it. Like, hey, so you are signing up. And so, but it was literally the best decision that I guess was made for me in my life. I mean, and it did take me a while to complete because I was also working part-time, but I just, it was definitely invaluable. So I absolutely am a proponent of going that route.
So I'm going to agree with everything that's been said, and in particular, Sabrina raised a really relevant point, which is sort of, you know, how the LLM sits with our colleagues, right? And you know, within her firm, you know, she was voluntold to, you know, to get this LLM, right? And I can also tell you that just within our practice, when we're dealing with our peers and when we're dealing with firms, etc., the LLM is a sense almost like a mark of credibility. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're competent or that you know what you're doing and that you're going to exercise good judgment, but it at least tends to be an indicator that you have exposure to, sort of like, as Sabrina said, a certain baseline, right? Because, you know, going into the LLM program, in fact, going into the JD program, I will confess to you, I'd never even heard of an LLM. I don't come from a family with a lot of lawyers. In fact, I come from a family with 0 lawyers. I didn't know what an LLM was, and I couldn't spell LLM. But you know, the process of being exposed to law school, I certainly did learn what an LLM was, right? And within the LLM, you know, so prior, what I didn't mention is that prior to law school, I spent 7 years in management consulting, and I was very well versed in concepts, you know, that touched and concerned M&A, and also I worked some of my clients in the past have been, you know, private foundations and charitable trusts, and so I was very well versed in all the things that sort of lead to charitable planning and philanthropy and all that sort of thing. But for example, you know, all the 700s, right? All, you know, partnership tax. I had no idea. Right. In fact, it was a requirement of my LLM program to take a class of partnership tax, which at the time I thought, well, I'm going to satisfy this requirement because it's a requirement, but I'm not sure why I need to take this class. A partnership is pretty intuitive, isn't it? And then I took this class, you know, and I was like, and my head exploded, you know, with capital accounts and just all of it, right? And I was so glad that I got to take this course. And so my point is that to sort of underscore what Sabrina said, that the baseline of exposure that you get can be very valuable. And at the same time, you may or may not necessarily need to have an LLM. And I'll just say a broader point, because another question, interestingly enough, in the chat was, do I need a CPA? There was someone there there was one person who was a CPA, I think, who said, do I need an LLM? Another person was an LLM who says, do I need a CPA? I'm not going to opine on whether or not you need a CPA because I'm not a CPA. But what I will tell you is that knowledge is hardly ever wasted. And you know, I can tell you that I don't know how I could do what I do without having an MBA with a focus in finance, because of the things that I learned and how we think about deals, right? Yet there are many practitioners of corporate tax law who don't have an MBA and who are infinitely more knowledgeable than I am, and know very well what they're doing, right? And so all that is to say that there's no answer that necessarily broadly applies universally to everyone. It depends on the facts and circumstances.
Rene, I would piggyback on what you said about the CPA. For the person who asked that question, I think you have to decide whether you're actually interested in it. Don't just decide to become a CPA, take the accounting classes, go through that. It can be a difficult experience, and taking the exam to enhance your legal career. Do it if you want to. I know some attorneys who are CPAs and it helps them, but they were CPAs first and they became attorneys after that. You don't want to decide to become a CPA because you think I'm going to be a tax attorney, I should do that. If you want to, okay, but do it for the right reasons.
Yeah, if I can just add, oh, go ahead, Robbie, sorry.
No, that's okay, Sabrina, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, so I am not a CPA either, but I did spend 5 years coming in at a very senior level at EY. And I will tell you, so my answer would say it also depends on kind of which track you want to go with tax. So for me, when I entered EY, I had already been practicing 11 years. I came in as a senior manager, but as a tax lawyer, having very little understanding of the kind of tax accounting side of things. So it was a challenge for me when I got there. You know, I brought very strong skills, but there was definitely a piece of knowledge that I was missing that I had to be kind of taught more along the way, and still was a bit challenging for me. You know, when you're talking about, you know, provisions for income taxes on the corporate side and kind of understanding how all of the bookkeeping and stuff works and understanding the movements and how they impact your transactions, you know, it just wasn't something I knew. So I had to kind of get help from even more junior people and say, okay, this is what we're trying to accomplish. This is what I see here. Can you explain this to me, right? So I do think that whether or not you need that additional CPA overlay can also depend on which track you're taking. And if you are kind of looking for a long-term career at an accounting firm, it may be beneficial.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, as far as the accounting question, you know, getting a CPA, you know, I do not have a background in accounting, and it's something you have to understand. If you don't have that background in accounting, then you need to be able to have some confidence in working with CPAs, because certainly CPAs are a huge part of our practice, especially in the M&A area where we're setting up structures for businesses. We need to have those CPAs all with us every step of the way. So you need to understand the concepts. It doesn't hurt to have that background, but you can figure it out without it. You just have to understand you're going to be working with CPAs. Have some confidence, you know, be able to talk to them. They're going to know some things you don't as a tax lawyer. You are certainly going to know some things they don't. And that's the advantage of having that LLM. So either way, it just depends on really kind of, it's just an expansion of knowledge. If you want it, go get it. If not, get to work.
Thank you. So you were covering, I think you all did a great job covering kind of the difference between CPAs and kind of the tax attorney side of things. But like Sabrina was talking about, there's tax attorneys in accounting firms. You know, obviously there's law firms out there. There's the IRS and different government jobs. There's in-house counsel. What are your thoughts about those different types of employers? You know, what would your day-to-day work be in those different positions?
I'm happy to kind of start this off. So it was very interesting because when I started at EY, what I realized was it was actually a very from the attorney side, a lot of my application for that first 11 years was more theoretical than it was practical. And in the sense that I would kind of do more transaction planning in theory and less in the detail, right? And so when I went to EY, you know, the thing that happened there was I still needed all of that knowledge, but then I was actually looking at, you know, financial statements and tax basis balance sheets and really trying to figure out how this transaction that I've planned and the results, right, as they impact the client's numbers, right, how that how that's going to affect what was happening historically, right? And so it was a different practice for me, but very interesting, but just in a little bit of a different way. I will say that I think that my experience at EY has completely transformed the way that I practice law, right? Because now I'm looking much more into the actual details of how the numbers are moving, even on my transactions. Now, I didn't know that at first, and I didn't realize the value of the accountants until I started working more on that side. And now, as far as I'm concerned, it's completely invaluable. So if I think about kind of what is done on the accounting side versus the legal side, I would say, you know, on the accounting side, in addition to kind of putting together the theory of how you'd want the transaction to go, I think that on the legal side, in addition to that, on the accounting side, you're then kind of basically stress testing that thing based on kind of historically what has happened in the company, and understanding how those transactions could affect that company in the future, and could affect the owners in the future based on how the tax attributes, you know, move. So I think, you know, so that's what I'll say about, you know, law firm versus accounting. I don't have any experience on the other sides, either in government or in-house. But to Robbie's point as well, we work in law firms very, very closely with our counterparts in the accounting firms. You know, when I think about kind of how I work with in-house counsel, more often than not, I'm working with in-house counsel who are not tax lawyers, and so it's a little, you know, it's generally only in larger companies do you have in-house counsel that have those separate tax functions on the legal side, or I could be working with like a tax director who is more of a CPA than a lawyer. And so oftentimes there's a little bit of translation, you have to be always kind of learning how to speak the language of whoever, you know, that person is on the in-house side, just to make sure that what you need to get across is getting across. But it's definitely, I view it as different languages in all of those areas. So
I'd like to touch on something real quick that Sabrina said that seems to, in my opinion, be very important with this idea of these different languages that we speak, right? And sort of see, you know, CPAs look at things one way, and it's funny because, you know, as a finance person, you know, we love to make fun of accountants, right? Or just tease them, right? But there's no question that accountants, you know, but when you take, you know, when you focus on finance, like you know, like I did, you take a boatload of accounting classes, and let me tell you, it changes fundamentally how you look at any asset, truly, right? And certainly fundamentally changes how you look at deals, right? And so depending on what your background is, it's going to affect how you look at any transaction that comes before you, right? I would imagine any controversy that comes before you, right? And so, you know, a finance person look at something one way, you know, and a tax accountant would look at that same thing surprisingly differently, right? And you know, and so it goes. And so you know, my point earlier about knowledge is never wasted, experience is never wasted either. So I know that we have on this call a number of you know, young lawyers and even aspiring lawyers. It's important to understand that, you know, you are who you are, and you show up with whatever you show up with, and whatever it is that you show up with, that bucket of skills and talents and life experiences that you have is believe it or not, unique to you, and you have the opportunity to add value in a way that no one else does, and that same thing is true for all of your other peers as well. And so my point in mentioning this is that like when a deal comes, when I get a deal, and the very first thing that I do, because of my background in management consulting, is I want to know what's going on in this deal, right? Like what's animating this deal, right? Like why there's at least two parties coming to this table, right? Why are they here, right? What's the deal rationale? What matters to them? Because that's going to affect your issue spotting, right? There's certain things that are just not going to be relevant if they don't matter to the client, right? And your job, no matter what lawyer you are, no matter what tax lawyer you are, is to serve and add value to your client, right? And so so the more that you personally as a professional can do to add value to your client, the more your client, whether that's an internal client, external client, your firm, whoever it is going to appreciate what you're doing, right? So when I get a deal, I look at it, and after I know why this deal is happening, I actually jump straight to like I'll look at the substantive terms that have been proposed and all this kind of stuff, and I look at the numbers, right? And I look at, what kind of valuation, how did we arrive at this valuation? I'll look at the multiples. I'll even look at how they, if there's a discounted cash flow, I'll actually look at it. I'll look at, what are the inputs and all that, because I want to, and sometimes things will come up and I'll raise them with the client and I'll go, hey, I'm just curious, about the multiples on this thing. What's up with this, right? And I've actually on numerous times the client has come to me or come to my supervising attorney and gone, holy cow, I'm so glad that you raised that. We're going to talk to the other side, whether it's buy side, sell side, whoever. And actually this is going to merit a conversation, right? Because we were looking at it this way, but we hadn't really looked at it this way, right? And so I'm adding value, right? So it's the yes and kind of thing, right? So my point in mentioning this is to just underscore the fact that every one of us, we should be value added, and we are focused hopefully on client service rather than just doing a task. So
only thing I'd add to Sabrina and Rene is give you a little different perspective, because I do not have an accounting background. When I got into this, I had some transactional background, but I actually took a class in law school called Accounting for Lawyers, which is otherwise termed Accounting for Idiots Who Didn't Take Accounting in their undergrad, and dropped it, by the way. But you can do this practice without having that accounting background. But what it means is you have to take a different perspective. You have to learn to deal with accountants. And so when I have deals, whether it's an asset purchase, some sort of merger, a reorg, anything that's going to have some sort of tax component to it, then I've got to get the CPAs involved, especially when dealing with the calculations. Whereas Sabrina can actually come up with the calculations up front, I try to avoid that. That's a waste of my client's time for me to actually do the calculations when I have a CPA involved in the transaction. What I do is I check them. I'm able to have, especially after 26 years of practicing law, I know at this point as a tax lawyer what kind of questions to ask to make sure that their calculations are accurate. But I rely on CPAs. They are a huge part of my practice. And especially locally, it is important for me to have good, qualified, reliable, competent CPAs involved in my transactions. And so a lot of what I've done in 26 years is, I hate to be very judgmental, but I am very judgmental when it comes to CPAs. I've learned over this time period, especially being in the world's largest small town, Mobile, Alabama, which CPAs know the game and which don't, and which ones can be relied on and which don't. And it's imperative for me to have good CPAs involved in my transactions, and then to make sure that they're walking alongside me and the client to get a good result for the client.
And I would add that it's important to develop good working relationships with a handful of CPAs. And I agree with Robbie, they're not all created equal. Rene, you mentioned about issue spotting. Yes, it's very important. No matter what you're doing, whether you're just told by your supervisor to research a particular issue, look at a few documents, whatever it might be, at some point, you will be interacting with clients, and the clients will ask you questions that might appear to be odd, but they're worried about a lot of different things, and you have to be able to develop your issue spotting skills. And it helps to try and learn about as many things as you can. It doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily advise, for example, on maybe section 1202 transactions if you haven't done any of those type of work, for stock sales. But I mean, at least have an idea of what they are. I mean, you can find out about it. Perhaps if you have to tell the client, look, I need to bring someone in on this matter, that's fine. It's just important, though, when you are engaged in client development, that you learn how to issue spot, you learn when to bring someone in, you learn how to tell if your client needs perhaps some emotional support. I'm not trying to be facetious about it, but it happens. I've gotten, I don't know what it is. I've had some clients who were crying to me in the conference room, just the two of us. They received a notice from the IRS stating that the client owed a couple $100,000, and it wasn't just a frivolous claim from the IRS. They admitted there was a huge problem. So you get that type of situation. So it may not come up now for those of you who are in the audience as far as dealing with that type of thing. You might work for someone who's actually dealing with that. But as you, as more time goes by, as you're practicing tax law or whatever type of law you're practicing, you will be dealing with those situations. So it's just important you develop the skills that I just mentioned, as well as what my co-panelists have said.
Thank you. So we had an interesting a question from the audience. For 1Ls, 2Ls, 3Ls, those that are still in the JD program, in your opinion, sorry, I'm trying to find the question. In your opinion, do you think it's possible to get a law firm job practicing tax as a recent graduate? And then I'm going to add, if so, what are some things they can do in law school to help them prepare for such a job?
I am, and it's just to make sure I understand the question. So is this getting the job as a 3L and going into, trying to go directly into a law firm, or just generally looking for a law firm position?
I think the question is more towards like, is it possible to, as a recent JD graduate, to get a job in kind of the tax area at a law firm, probably without going to pursue an LLM? Gotcha.
Okay. So I will say, I'm actually one of those people who believes that anything is possible. And I think it's really just about kind of how focused and determined you are to do it. Now that focus and determination may cause you to have to compromise a few things, right? So, so first, when you're trying to kind of enter into a different field, I would say you need to definitely know all of the players and all of the options. So where you are locally, understand the larger firms that may have specific tax practices, and maybe the mid or the smaller tier firms that have diversified practices, where you might be able to bring your current skill set, but then overlay as well some additional, or carve out some additional tax work to do, right, at that smaller firm. So understanding kind of what the state of play is for the firms that are in your area and what is required at those firms, kind of to Robbie's point. I think also, in addition to that, I think relationships are really important. So to the extent that you have relationships with attorneys that are either in practices that you'd want to be associated with, I think kind of reaching out to those attorneys, having the conversation, and really trying to discover whether or not there is opportunity available for somebody in your circumstance is important. And then I think you cast a wide net. I think that the wider the net, the more chance you have at success, and casting that wide net is oftentimes requires you to go beyond where you currently are living. You can find, especially these days, I mean, people need tax attorneys, but if you don't have the LLM training and you don't have the experience either coming out of an accounting firm or a law firm, then you need to be going somewhere where they're willing to train you, and to find that place, you may need to cast a wider net. So those are just some things I would.
There's a question in the chat about, are law firms looking for more specific experience from experienced tax attorneys? Well, unfortunately, I think in some cases that's probably the case. Actually, I have one of the jobs I applied to before I got into what I'm doing now. I got the inside scoop. Basically, they were looking to hire somebody. They had someone picked out who did the job essentially. And as long as that person didn't mess up during the interview process, that person was getting a position. I found that out. I don't know how. I was really lucky to do so. I think, though, it's important to be aware of the fact that I'm not going to say everyone, but a lot of firms don't have time to train. It's a different climate than it was 20 years ago, even 30 or 40 years ago. I mean, I wasn't practicing law then, but it's a different climate where there's training before. Even IRS folks who I've spoke with have said on a particular issue, have said, this is beyond my scope of training. I almost fell out of my chair on one time when someone said that. So, I mean, there's just not enough maybe time, money, things like that. Expect to hit the ground running. What you can do, however, as Sabrina said, you cast a wide net. Also, and this will take work though, if you are able to get a position at a small firm that doesn't have a tax department, perhaps you can start one. That takes a lot of work, and you might be asked to do, of course, other things for the firm to earn, whatever your salary is, and it might be hard. It can be tough. There's a lot that goes into it, especially if you have family commitments, things like that. But that's one way to go about it, and you can start developing experience that way. You also, like Sabrina said, can actually speak with folks who, and in my case, I spoke to people who went to Georgetown. They were very much willing to help. I really appreciate what they did. They sat down for coffee, gave me advice. I didn't necessarily get a position through them, but they helped me figure it out. And if you attend bar events, tax section events, county bar, tax section, DC bar, at least where I'm at, if you do those type of things, I can't tell you exactly where you're going to land, but I think it'll work out. Of course, if you can find a position at a boutique tax firm, fantastic. Interning, hopefully you get paid, but if you don't get paid, at least initially, start doing that. Just get some experience, because otherwise it's tough to get, I think, the experience and training that you need.
I'll riff off of two things that I just heard. Can you hear me all right now, by the way? Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. I swapped audio sources, so I want to make sure you can still hear me. Okay. So two things. Number one is with regard to sort of substantive expertise. A lot of good and knowledgeable tax lawyers that I have known and met formerly worked for the government. There's, I think Roberta mentioned the Office of Chief Counsel. There are many positions within Treasury, whatever, that can be really great training grounds for you. It seems, at least from the people that I've met who've worked and trained within those settings. Number one. Number two, in terms of substantive sort of knowledge, right? We talked about formal degree programs like LLMs and so forth, and seeking one CPA and all that sort of thing. But in addition to that, there are also a tremendous amount of materials available through the ABA, through the ABA tax section, through all sorts of other ABA entities, by the way, as well. The ABA business law, ABA real property trust and estates. I mean, when you think about it, our ABA tax section, typically at our meetings, the keynote speaker is someone from, Treasury or the IRS. These are high level people who are the people who make policy, who set policy, who enforce policy, who really, in many cases, in some of our CLEs, are the people who wrote certain parts of the code, right, or at least certain regs, right? So you will have access to a tremendous amount of expertise if you want it. There is no shortage of information out there for those of you who want to become more steeped in the technical aspects of what we do. So, in answer to, I think it was Angela who asked the question about kudos to you for putting yourself out there, Angela, mentioning that you're a solo practitioner. Yeah, please use the resources that are available to you. There's tons of them in terms of CLEs and also articles that are on the ABA website through the tax section and other sections within the ABA. And I might also add one other thing, is the people are a tremendous resource as well. Adam sort of alluded to it a moment ago. I'm going to underscore it additionally. The network of people that you'll meet in places like the ABA tax section and others are invaluable. I've not only will you of course make friends and you'll find mentors, but you'll also find people that you can ask substantive questions to. You can say, hey, this thing came up, and these are people who are not necessarily in your law firm, and so you don't necessarily have to feel like you're going to appear unknowledgeable or unprepared. And by the way, another thing, smart people ask questions, right? So even within your own firm, it's okay to ask questions. But even now, it's great to have people outside of your firm who are not going to judge you, who are not responsible for making decisions about your compensation, that you can ask questions to. And by the way, there are many people who make connections that lead to employment opportunities through places like the ABA tax section and others. And I can tell you that I'm involved in the ABA tax section. I'm also involved in the real property trust and estate section, but I'm also an officer of the ABA Young Lawyers Division. I can tell you, I'm going to put a quick plug in for the Young Lawyers Division and the ABA. Some of you who are fairly new to the practice, you'll find great sort of kinship there in the ABA Young Lawyers Division. But I'm also involved in others. I'm involved in the Hispanic Bar and the National Bar Association, which is the preeminent association of African American lawyers, law students, and judges in this country. And I can tell you that those are great resources as well. Whatever bar associations you can find, there will be value there for you. And but I might also add, because I know some of your law students, you don't approach it just in terms of, hi, I'm so-and-so, got a job for me? or something equivalent to that. It's, hi, I'm so-and-so, nice to meet you. I heard that you can you tell me more about your practice? And then you form a relationship, a professional relationship, and then things flow from that more often than not. So anyway, just putting, that's right. And in addition to that, Genevieve also mentioned, most of what we do at the ABA is without cost to law students, i.e. to register for the CLEs, the meetings, etc. Most, if not all of it, and also, so cost should not be a barrier to participating, especially things that are virtual and that are online. So anyway, that's my plug for networking and bar associations, which I have found tremendous value in, and I could not be where I am right now without having had those resources available to me.
So I would add to what Rene just said, consider, it depends on what your local bar does, but consider joining or becoming part of an attorney mentor-mentee program. Very, very valuable. I've served as a mentor. I've been mentored, but it definitely will work well for you. And especially if you're working somewhere, you don't necessarily want to talk about certain issues to someone in your firm or company. You want to talk to someone on the outside and give you a better perspective. And you might also have some confidential things you want to discuss.
One thing I'd add here is, being in a small firm and always being the tax lawyer who had to develop a tax practice and maintain a tax practice. It's important. If you're going to be a small town and deal with a tax practice, you've got to be flexible. You got to be able to handle a lot of different areas of tax law. And that's hard. If you're at a big firm, and I found this, by knowing lawyers who work at big DC firms and big New York law firms, a lot of them are able to focus on one specific issue. In some cases, a lot of them are able to focus on one specific statute where that's all they do. Now I would have to slit my wrist. That would drive me insane, not being able to do a bunch of other stuff. But there's a lot of people, that's what they do, and they get paid very well to be an absolute specialist in 1031 exchanges, That's all they do, or whatever the issue is. If you're going to be in a small firm, in a small town, you've got to be flexible. Your client is the focus. And it's, again, like Rene was saying earlier, client satisfaction, meeting the needs of the client is your paramount priority. And that means when they come to you and they have no idea what's going on, they've gotten some notice from the IRS stating that they're being audited for their worker classification issues, the way they've been classifying employees. You've got to be able to understand worker classification issues very quickly. I had one years ago, and it was a horrible, horrible year, by the way, because I had to become an expert on this statute called 409A, which may be the worst tax statute that's ever been drafted. And I had to become an expert because I had two clients who had non-qualified deferred comp plans that were in trouble. And I had to deal with those issues with major penalties associated with the client. But also, just because I have to become an expert on everything doesn't mean I can't focus on particular issues. And it also makes it extraordinarily important for me to develop my network of other tax lawyers. On the 409A issue in particular, I called a lawyer who I'd gotten to be great friends with through a networking part, actually through the ABA. And he was an expert in 409A. He really had focused on it. And I recognized the limits of my capability on that issue and went and got this lawyer and affiliated him, even though I think he was in Ohio, but he was a great lawyer and understood the issues. And I got him involved in the case, and I managed the case for the client and made sure we got a good result. So I have to know the limits of my expertise on a lot of these issues. Sometimes that's hard. Sometimes it's difficult to figure out where that line is, but it's important to develop a good network of tax lawyers. For the solo practitioner, I think Angela mentioned earlier in a chat that she's a solo practitioner. Angela, it's going to be imperative for you to develop a network of tax lawyers. It can be through the ABA. It can be through local tax lawyers. As a matter of fact, when I started my practice, a group of local tax lawyers who were my direct competitors ended up being some of my mentors as a young tax lawyer back in 2005, 2006. And I developed an excellent relationship with them and actually refer cases back to them because I'm so appreciative for what they did for me. And Angela, you'll be surprised that tax lawyers are more than willing to help you in developing your practice and helping you to kind of get started. But that's important.
I would say one of my mentors, I won't provide his name. However, he is in the middle of the country working for a firm. He's fantastic. He's one of the nicest people you will have ever met, you'll ever meet. And he actually contacted me. He was appreciative that I cited a private letter ruling in an outline on an ABA tax section panel that I served on. And I said, I'm flattered. I'm honored you're actually looking at this stuff and contacting me. And point being is the most powerful folks in this area of law are some of the most nicest people you'll ever meet. And a lot of tax attorneys, including everyone here on this panel and people you might meet at events, are willing to talk with you. Because one thing I learned from another mentor, he said, think about tax law. You're always trying to find out the right answer as opposed to other areas of practice. And I took that to heart. And I sense, and I believe he's right. And just from talking to my colleagues, even talking to, attorneys at the IRS, appeals officers at the IRS, they're interested in finding out the right answer. It's something unique, I think, in the practice of law.
Absolutely.
And
I've always put it as putting together a puzzle. It's a great part about tax law.
So someone asked a question in the chat about, Kenesha, about taking different courses, getting your LLM instead of specializing. Congrats on becoming a Hoya, by the way. Here's my answer to this. I did not specialize. Now, I suppose if you really knew you were already working somewhere, let's say that specialized in estate planning and you wanted to get an estate planning certificate, or you're so dead set on that and you had the position and you wanted to develop those skills, maybe. But otherwise, I would take a lot of different courses, perhaps take more than the required amount of credits for graduation to, get an idea and get some working knowledge in a particular area of tax. People, the professors at Georgetown and really, I think at all these tax loan programs are fantastic. Most of them, if not all, are adjuncts. They really, not to say a full-time professor would not be this way, of course, but they want to be there, and they want to make your experience enjoyable, and they want you to learn. They want to teach you. So I would try to take as many different courses as you're interested in at Georgetown.
One thing I'd add there is, as far as specialization, if you're going to go to work for, I think somebody mentioned tax credits. I actually have a friend of mine that transitioned from tax law and went to work for a general tax law practice like I've got, and went and now works for a firm that does nothing but low income tax credit work. And that's all he does with his life. So now he's specialized. But if you're going to do specialization, you can do that after you graduate from tax school. Okay, it's imperative for you to get a broad picture of tax law. And the good thing about most LLM programs is just going to give you a pretty wide variety of courses for you to take, so you can learn everything. But a specialization, you're going to be able to do that when you get that job with another firm. So I really wouldn't focus on that right now as far as the LLM point. I did want to make one more mention as far as tax practice in a small town. It is wonderfully frustrating and wonderfully exciting to do this kind of work as doing a general tax practice. The types of work that you do when you're managing really tax practice for your clients and adapting to whatever their situation is. That means that you get to learn a lot. I have a lot of knowledge. I'm not going to say a little knowledge. I'll say a lot of knowledge about a lot of different areas of tax law because I've had to. Doesn't necessarily mean I get to bill for all of it. That is a negative, but it does mean that I have gotten a wonderful broad picture of tax law. I do estate and gift tax planning, mergers and acquisitions, reorgs, entity formation, 409A, which was awful. I had a fascinating case last year dealing with expatriate tax law, where somebody had renounced their citizenship. And you wouldn't realize, but the tax laws are incredibly oppressive to somebody who's renounced their citizenship, because they do not want them to take all their money and go somewhere else. I had to do state and local tax defense, and that's any variety of things. That's sales taxes, property taxes, income taxes, whatever your state has. You've got to represent in front of the Department of Revenue, and you got to know the procedures, just like a litigator. I do IRS.
Robbie, I would also add that for those of you who don't have a CPA background, use the knowledge of a CPA. I mean,
Absolutely.
I was a finance major, so I took accounting classes, so I'm comfortable looking at some documents. But I'll tell you what, a great CPA is very valuable to me. The knowledge that they pass, and also you get an idea of what they're thinking when the CPA prepares a return a particular way, or if there's a particular proposal regarding a tax plan, especially if you're asked to prepare tax opinion letters. And I talked about before, developing relationships with CPAs. It's very important. They can be a valuable resource. They can give you an idea of the big picture. They can also give you an idea on the IRS's approach to perhaps auditing returns. The CPA can tell you, hey, this issue, I understand in the abstract, it could be important, but when I prepare these returns, I really don't have a problem with X. So utilize a CPA as a resource, develop the relationships with CPAs.
Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to add one more thought regarding kind of the courses that you take if you're going to start your LLM program, or even as you're trying to kind of figure out where you specialize, as you move along. A little known fact about me is that before I joined EY, I actually spent about 4.5 years focusing solely on tax credit work in low-income housing, new markets, and historics, as well as energy. And one of the things that I realized there was that all of the years focused on corporate tax and partnership tax were very necessary layers, right? Before I added on that additional layer of learning for the tax credit transactions. And so when you're thinking about even, getting your LLM and you're thinking about, well, specializing or not, I think that, corporate tax, partnership tax, basics of tax controversy, taxation of property transactions, right? Income tax, like those are just kind of foundational classes that no matter what you do, you need that as a building block. And so I think that definitely for people who are struggling to kind of figure out where they want to end up, I think that's important. And even if you're in your practice and you're still kind of trying to decide where you want to take your tax practice, I still think that, those kind of focusing on those building blocks will help you to be even more prepared as you grow, or as you progress in tax and you determine, well, do I focus on, taxation of financial instruments? Do I become solely focused on bankruptcy tax, or, or is it partnerships or M&A? Or like Robbie said, and Adam and I think all of us have pretty diverse practices, like, or is it that I need a little bit of piece of all of that? I guess the last thing I'll add to that is that kind of strong base level of knowledge in those core areas also helps me to feel very confident in approaching any new area of tax, right? Because I look at it as just an additional layer on, right, those kind of core principles that were built, in those major kind of tax subject areas. And so that really kind of allows me to always expand the practice because, I'm covering less ground, right? So
I'll provide one example. At Georgetown, I took a class. It was titled Joint Ventures Between Nonprofit Entities and For-Profit Entities. And I learned a lot. And it sort of led me down the path of, dealing with nonprofit tax issues. And actually have a few clients who wanted to start a nonprofit. So go figure. I wouldn't have envisioned that when I was in school, but that's what's happened. So it is important to get, as Sabrina said, get certainly a baseline for sure. But like I said, try different courses too, see where it goes. Somehow it helps you.
And I'll double down on what Adam just said and what Sabrina just said and what Robbie just said, and I'll reframe it in the following way. I'll say keep an open mind. You never know, to Sabrina's point, what the things how you're gonna be able to use the things that you're learning at any given point in time, right? She mentioned about tax credits and how her previous work with the fed into her ability to competently do the next thing, right? In a sense, the earlier you are in your journey, and it is a journey, and you're, as a tax attorney and so forth, the easier it is to do what I'm going to describe, which is that, when something comes up, here's the thing, right? So all the time you're going to be in circles, and hopefully you will be in circles. And if you're not, you need to, like I say, join some bar associations. So you are within those circles where people talk about things that you don't know or don't understand, right? When that happens, just a simple tip, go Google what they were talking about, right? When someone comes up to you and says, hey, something, 1031 like on exchange, and you're like, look it up, right? Or someone talks about, whatever it is, right? You want to know why Robbie hates 409 so much, right? Maybe research it, right? Research what's the difference between a qualified plan and a non-qualified plan, or whatever, right? The more sort of intellectually curious you can be, and oftentimes it's going to have to be on your own time and your own money, right? Because you're investing in yourself, right? Not all of this is going to be billable to some client somewhere, and that's okay because you are building something. You're building yourself. You're building your future self today, right? And so, and I'll give you, for example, there's a wonderful colleague who's in my hometown. I'm fortunate he's in my hometown. His name is Steve Gorin. This guy has this encyclopedic knowledge of the code. I've never seen anything
Renee,
like
that's
it.
that's one of my mentors. I wasn't going to provide it, but yeah, it's Steve.
There you go. Yes, yeah, and he's brilliant. If you get a chance to watch one of his CLEs, do so. Right, you will learn a lot. Right, and so at one point, in a sort of similar situation through the bar associations, we had the opportunity to become acquainted, and then he was kind enough to include me on a CLE that we were presenting for the Missouri Bar, for our state bar association, right? And the subject matter was the Secure Act, right? And of course, I knew just enough to be dangerous, but I certainly didn't know enough to speak publicly about it. But I got up to speed, and I did my part, and I was so blessed that he gave me that opportunity. Well, fast forward, I've become a lot more knowledgeable about all kinds of provisions about the Secure Act, and I've spoken on a number of different occasions. And guess what? It's also become valuable to my firm, right? In addition to that, recently somebody tapped me to get on a CLE about qualified small business stock, right? I ended up being able to be on this panel with Benita Park and Paul Lee. And if you don't know who they are, Google them. If you don't know what qualified small business stock is, Google it, right? Because it is something extremely interesting. But the point is that I had the opportunity to then become a lot more competent in the subject than I had been. And so now, fast forward, guess what? I'm sort of the qualified small business stock guy in my firm now. Like whenever somebody has a question, they keep coming to me at my firm, right? And this hopefully means that I add a little bit of value to my firm, and the people that I work with kind of see me in that light, right? And that's something that you want. You want the people that you work with to see you as somebody who can be a valuable resource, who can help make their job just a little bit easier, right? And help them to serve their clients just a little bit more, right? And so that's the person you want to be, and the way you get there is by seizing every opportunity you can to become more competent in areas that you're not competent in. So,
Bryce, do you want to just talk about like one more area, and then we can go around with final thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. We've talked a little bit about some of the benefits that you all receive from the ABA, whether that's networking, being able to speak at different events and gaining that knowledge. So how can law students, young lawyers get more involved in the ABA? Like, what are some opportunities there for them, and maybe what are some other benefits they could receive from that?
Well, I can't tell you in the limited time we have here today about how much ABA tax has benefited me, serving on panels, getting permitted to write articles, either as my own article or as a contributor to an article, and just learning and meeting people and networking. How did I get involved? Some of it is luck. It takes meeting the right folks. So go around and meet as many people as you can. But if you are attending your first conference, it's free, by the way. And especially if you're in school, it's free. Maybe it's $20 outside school first event. But anyway, go to, they have a welcoming reception, and usually there's a new attendee meeting. And they'll ask you, are you interested in writing articles or doing X? And I met Steve Gorin. So it's worth it. It's hard to know exactly where your path might go, but try that. And I think you'll find that you'll get a much better experience in the ABA tax section.
Yeah, I'll add on to Adam. You're gonna find the ABA tax section now that we're going live. It's not going to be this anymore. The Brady Bunch boxes on our screen. I mean, it's actually going to be live. You're going to meet human people face to face, and you're going to be surprised that people like me and Adam and Renee and Sabrina and others, we're going to be walking around. We're going to be talking to people. My first contact with the ABA was a guy named Mort Harris, who was a great tax lawyer out of Columbus, Georgia. And if you are a Columbus, Georgia lawyer, you probably know him because he wasn't just a great tax lawyer. He was a great lawyer. I truly was. And I was terrified showing up at my first ABA meeting. Didn't know a soul, didn't know what I needed to do, where I needed to go. And Mort saw my struggling bald self walking around the halls, not knowing where to go, and grabbed me and talked to me and spent 10 minutes just sitting talking in the hall. and then grabbed me and took me in the closely held business section meeting because he knew that that's where my practice was. But the committee structure is important. You're gonna find that people will be talking to you at these meetings if you're coming, and that's for first-time lawyers, and that's for older lawyers who are transitioning. You know, I mean, it's a great event. But use the committee structure. If you want to look into corporate law, go see the corporate committee programs. If you're doing with more small businesses like my practice, then you need to go to closely held business. Go to partnerships. Go to S corporations. You know, the committee structure itself is going to lend itself to helping you, and you're going to find that there are going to be people at these meetings that are very friendly, very helpful, and very interested on you. But you also need to be bold. You know, my situation, I got lucky and found Morton, and I was speaking on a panel the next meeting. Don't expect that doesn't necessarily happen. Be bold. Introduce yourself to Adam Abrahams. He is the chair of the closely held business committee. Go find
I'm low
him.
key. I'm on an island.
Absolutely.
Easy going. Don't worry. Like some
But
people
go,
will
be bold. What do you
some
have
people
to
will go
lose?
up to you. Some
That's
people will
right.
actually go up to you. That doesn't mean, by the way, you waylay a group that seems to be huddled up. Probably not best form. There are plenty of folks, though, who you see just standing there. Just talk to them, say hi. Maybe they don't offer much in the way of conversation, but okay, give it a try, because when you start going to these section events, you meet one new person each time. It'll start to add up. You will see. It's hard to believe, but when you try it, you will see how the benefits piling up for you.
And it does take time. Some of my dearest friends are ABA tax section lawyers. One from San Francisco, another one from New Haven, Connecticut, another one in Ohio. I mean, but it took a long time, and you have to keep going to these meetings and get involved with the committee. And you'll be just like any other organization. You will eventually develop those relationships that'll lead you into the organization. And on top of this, the whole time you're getting quality CLE.
And don't get discouraged if
people.
I would say, Robbie, don't get discouraged if you think you want to be a part of this committee, someone doesn't email you back, or someone appears to be standoffish. Don't get discouraged. Go to someone else. Go to another committee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll just, from my experience, I mean, similar to everyone else on the panel, it has been truly, truly invaluable. Coming from New York, I spent most of my time in the early years just participating in the New York State Bar Association, and then was introduced to the benefits of the ABA, later on, and really kind of once I moved to Charlotte. And it has literally been career changing for me. Not only have I did have the good fortune of having a great mentor, Wells Hall, who, when I attended my first meeting, he was kind enough to really introduce me to everybody he knew. And so that was a huge benefit. But it also led to, because he also knew me and knew kind of what I was capable of, in his introductions, he also then said, oh yes, and she would love to, because we talked about it, right? We talked about what I'd like to do and where I'd like to see my career going. And then he was able to, as he introduced me, to say that, yes, she'd be interested in joining the committee or speaking on a panel. And so that was really helpful as well. So I guess one of the points I would say is, make sure, if you do have mentors or people who are already involved, kind of talk to them. And while you're trying to kind of figure out your place, don't be afraid to share some of the things that you see yourself doing in the future, because some way may be made for that thing through participation in the ABA. And so I'd say, it led me to be on IRS comment projects, right? I'd never done anything like that before, but being a part of a team commenting on regulations, that opportunity came to me through the ABA. The speaking opportunities, as well as the leadership opportunities, and being able to be the diversity chair for closely held businesses, being able to be the CLE chair for real estate, and seeing how those positions can move you along into additional leadership level roles within the ABA. You know, it's just all been tremendously valuable, as well as helping to increase my overall profile within the tax bar, right? Which then leads to additional career opportunities, which, you know, also helped me to get, you know, my current position at McGuire Woods. So, you know, I think the benefits are definitely invaluable and countless.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Rene.
Yeah, and I would add this one thing, and that is that you know, some of you might be like me in that you don't come from a long line of tax lawyers, right? Like when I got to law school, like what I thought was basis was the people with a low voice in the choir. So I thought that was basis. So there you go. And but so if that's you, don't be shy. Understand that there are lots of folks around who are more than interested in embracing you, professionally speaking, bringing, you know, welcoming you, helping you along. Everybody here on this panel has been mentored by some really kind and generous people, or else we would not likely have been on this panel. And there are many people out there who are willing to do the same for you. I would just ask that when you have the opportunity to make sure that you do the same, take the opportunity to mentor people as well, because it will happen sooner than you think. And you know, I get to do it in spaces in the National Bar Association and the, you know, National Native American Bar Association, the Hispanic Bar, in the ABA, and in our local Women Lawyers Association. And I can tell you that that whenever you help others and mentor others in our profession, and in any profession for that matter, it's going to help you even more than it's going to help them, to be honest with you. So that's my 2 cents on mentorship and networking.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Rene. And I just want to jump in very quickly. I know time is short, with 2 very interesting, exciting opportunities, particularly for the younger folks, current students and practitioners. One is my committee, the Young Lawyers Forum, at the upcoming May meeting. And actually at all the meetings, we do something called the Bridge to Practice series, which are primer style panels meant to give you a very hands-on tips and tricks. How do you do this kind of thing? So we actually have 5 panels planned for the May meeting. One is going to be on controversy, one on transactional tax, one is going to be on employee benefits and compensation, and we have 2 cryptocurrency panels for those who want to get involved in this area. So please look at the programming. Registration is free for students. The other item for the current JD and LLM students, my committee also hosts the Law Student Tax Challenge, which some refer to as Tax Moot Court, even though it's not really that. It's a competition where you're given a hypothetical client prompt, which is based on some real world fact patterns. You participate in the competition, you write a memo, and the finalists go on to argue in front of very senior tax practitioners, IRS commissioner, IRS chief counsel, tax court judges. It's a fantastic competition, great way to learn some in-depth and some very practical tax tools when you're in law school. So I just want to mention those. Those are some excellent opportunities to have the rest to get involved.
Well, I haven't personally did the tax challenge. I've known people who did, and they said it was a very interesting and a great event that they attended and were able to participate in. So I definitely would suggest that to anybody who's interested.
Great. Well, I think we're just about out of time here, so I think I can probably wrap us up. First, thank you very much, all of our panelists and Bryce, for moderating the discussion and giving us excellent questions for today. I really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you, Adam and Sabrina. I got to give credit to Sabrina here, who actually came up with the idea for this panel and reached out to me, and we were able to make this happen. So really a very group effort to get it all done today. And thank you very much, everyone, for attending. I hope you found this useful, and would love to see some of you at the May meeting if you're able to make it to DC in person.